What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, November 13th, 2017, almost halfway through the month here, coming up on Thanksgiving. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. In fact, the talking points list is really huge. I don't know that I'm going to get through all of it today. Meanwhile, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And let's just get right on into it. A lot of stuff going on here. Apparently, Donald Trump is now in Manila and was greeted with thousands of people protesting the arrival of the U.S. president. And as you know, things are not really very good with the Philippines right now, going back to when Obama went down there and tried to lecture them on going easy on the drug criminals. Really, you shouldn't treat the drug criminals that bad. You know, they're just hardworking people. And at that point, the long-enduring U.S.-Philippine relations just dropped, and then all of a sudden Al-Qaeda showed up, and the Philippines had to deal with that to avoid a U.S. intervention. So now Trump is over there. Hopefully he's going to mend a few bridges, but the Philippine people are not happy about that at all. Now, over in the House Oversight Committee, Chairman Trey Gowdy has opened a new investigation into the Department of Justice's handling of the Hillary Clinton email scandal. Long overdue. And basically, not a lot of coverage about this in the corporate media. They don't want you looking at that stuff. Because if it comes on out that there was a crime going on there, if it comes on out that my speculation was correct, and Hillary was selling U.S. secrets to foreign interests using that weak private email server and that charitable foundation to collect and launder the money, the corporate media is going to have egg all over their face because they had the same information we did, and they dropped the ball on that. Now, as you know, Judge Roy Moore, he's a GOP nominee for the United States Senate, and all of a sudden he's been hit with these allegations that he inappropriately sexually approached or propositioned teenage girls something like 30 years ago. And a lot of people were very suspicious about that whole situation because all of a sudden the Washington Post had the identity of 4 girls who did not know each other. And so it was suspicious right from the beginning. It looks like they're trying to get him on out so that the Democrats can win that Senate seat. The Democrats have not given up this idea of playing dirty. They think it's their divine right. And now we've got this YouTube video that came on out with it that accuses Washington Post reporter Beth secretly recorded offering a woman $1,000 to accuse Roy Moore. So Judge Roy Moore is now suing the Washington Post, but it looks like it's another hatchet job. And we have to be careful right now, ever since Harvey Weinstein's thing came on down. Everybody's flinging sexual allegations all over the place, and we need to be careful. Some of them are probably true. A lot of them are probably false, just desperate attempts to get free publicity or use as a political weapon, which seems to be the case with Judge Roy Moore. But he's absolutely adamant that none of this stuff happened, and he's staying in the Senate race. And already they've got Democrats out there saying, well, if he stays in the race and he wins, the Senate should remove him anyway. Now, this is all on the basis of unproven allegations, of at least one of which comes from a woman who's working for Moore's opposition. And is a hardcore Democratic supporter, worked for Joe Biden, worked for Hillary Clinton. And then we have the second allegation that another of these women was actually paid to come on out and accuse Judge Roy Moore. So we got to be very, very careful about this. But one thing, politics is dirty. We all know it is. And now it's on full view for the American people. Now, more information is coming on out regarding this meeting between Russian lawyer Natalia Valenskaya with Donald Trump Jr. And it turns on out that Glenn Simpson, who's the co-founder of Fusion GPS, which is right in the heart of all of this stuff, this is the company that hired former British spy Christopher Steele to come up with that dodgy dossier about Trump and the prostitutes and the rest of it. And it turns out this co-founder of Fusion GPS met with the lawyer, Veselnitskaya, before and after her meeting with Trump associates. And, of course, everybody at the meeting said that the meeting was totally about repeal of the Magnitsky Act. and had nothing to do with the campaign. So more Democrat dirty dealing is exposed here. And apparently, Fusion GPS is now starting to think about their own survival. A month ago, the two Fusion GPS co-founders pled the Fifth and refused to testify to the House Intelligence Committee. But now a third co-founder has agreed to answer questions from the committee next week. And basically, Fusion GPS made a deal that this third co-founder, Glenn Simpson, will come in and testify to the House committee if the other subpoenas for the other two co-founders are withdrawn. And the committee agreed to withdraw the subpoena. So that's where we are with that right now. Of course, if this third co-founder keeps saying, I don't know, that was somebody else's department, these other co-founders could get subpoenaed yet again. But the mere fact that they're out there saying Fifth Amendment tells you they know they did something wrong. It's like a flashing neon sign. Guilty, 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 guilty. Just velcroed onto their forehead. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. We're talking about all the corruption that's going on in Washington. And it's starting to look like somebody did put a dead horse's head in Donna Brazil's bed, because all of a sudden she's making the rounds, literally trying to discredit her own book. And she's out there now saying, no, the Democrats didn't rig the primaries, and no, Seth Rich was just, she's backing off on all of it. Well, too late. It is in the book, and I've been notified by Amazon that my copy is on the way. But it's very obvious. Pressure was brought to bear on her, and she's going on out, and she's going to be the good little Democrat and try and tone down the scandal, but it's a little too late. The word is out there. Now, speaking of doing a 180 turnaround, remember a couple of days ago, end of last week, President Trump said he believed Vladimir Putin when he claims he did not interfere with last November's election. Then he turns around immediately and in a press conference said he believes the views of the U.S. intelligence agencies, who are absolutely convinced that Russia intervened. Well, Mr. Trump, I would remind you of just how badly the CIA lied to President John F. Kennedy about the Bay of Pigs before you start taking their word on anything. Intelligence agencies, by definition, are not to be trusted. Now, of course, McCain is out there saying, of course you can't trust Putin, he's ex-KGB. You trust our spies over their spies. But then McCain wants a war. McCain is fully on board with bankrupting this nation as long as he gets to have more wars. It's going to be so much fun here. Now, Joe Biden is all of a sudden starting to make noises that he may run in 2020. And he's already starting to wander around the outside of the ring, hat in hand. And he basically is starting to take some shots at Hillary Clinton for how she handled her own campaign in 2016. And Biden was on the Today Show and said that Hillary's biggest mistake was that she should have addressed the middle class and said, this is what I'm going to do for you, rather than getting into all this tabloid conversations about Trump's locker room talk and allegations about Russia and the rest of it. And he said, this many months after the election, nobody can still say definitively what Hillary Clinton's position on the middle class was. And he's absolutely right. Her campaign was all shadow and no substance. She never really took a position on much of anything. She was just out there playing the woman card and the race card and everything else she could think of trying to win that White House, but she never really had a platform. Now, according to InfoWars, both Tony and John Podesta are facing criminal indictments linked to this ongoing Russia probe. And that may explain why the Podesta Group is now being shut down. It's one of Washington's most prominent lobbying groups. And as you know, Tony stepped down, and then the CEO left supposedly to start her own firm. But now we're hearing that the Podesta Group is just shutting down, which means they're going to back up the truck with the paper shredder in it and start shredding all their records. Now, here's a very interesting little story. This came out of Consortium News. Did al-Qaeda dupe Trump on the Syria attack? And they're talking about that gas attack. Of course, the new United Nations sponsored report on the April 4th sarin incident blames Bashar al-Assad's government. And the thing is, in that own report, in the UN's own report, is a smoking gun that says it is not true. because in Annex 2, which is a bunch of supporting documents put on the back, if you read that far, you would find out that more than 100 victims of sarin exposure were taken to several area hospitals before the alleged Syrian warplane could have approached the town of Khan Shaykhun. And but still, the desired conclusion: oh yeah, Assad did it. Assad did it. We've got to go in and remove Assad. But apparently, according to the UN's own report, in the Annex 2, the admission times of the records range between 0600 and 1600 hours, and those early cases arrived before the alleged airstrike. So, again, the sarin was there before the Syrian warplane was even overhead. Now, Russia has criticized this new UN report by pointing out that by default they excluded any consideration of any other parties in Syria having these chemical weapons. That was their thinking. We know that Assad is the only one with these weapons, therefore it must be him. That's their rationale. But we have been hearing reports over the last several weeks of every time the Syrian army overtakes yet another one of these Al-Qaeda or ISIS command bunkers, they find the chemical weapons or the precursors for the chemical weapons in there. And remember, some years ago, Bashar al-Assad, in a Russian negotiated deal, surrendered all of his chemical weapons to international inspectors. So the U.S. story is he hid some, and he's the only one that would dare use them. Well, again, the story was ridiculous. Why would he do it? He doesn't have a motive. He's winning the war. The only one who benefits from any kind of a chemical weapon attack is the United States, because it uses it as an excuse to say, we have to go on back in. We have to go back into Syria and get the evil Assad. Now, Syria has expressed its strong condemnation of the war crimes committed by the U.S.-led coalition against civilians in the country. And in a letter to the UN Secretary General and the head of the Security Council, the Syrian Foreign Ministry said that the international coalition's feverish quest to derail the victories of the country's army and its allies over ISIS terror groups it basically confirms the suspicious role of the coalition and the danger it poses to real efforts aimed at fighting ISIS. And again, we have been hearing this over the last several months, where the U.S. will go on in and say, we're going to bomb ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and whoops, we missed ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Sorry about that food processing plant or the water treatment plant or that oil pipeline. We're just really terrible eyesight on our pilots. They're overworked. We're dealing with manpower shortages. Now, BBC has uncovered details of a secret deal that let hundreds of ISIS fighters and their families escape from Raqqa under the watchful eyes of the U.S. and British-led coalition and the Kurdish-led forces who controlled the city. They just let them escape. A convoy including some of ISIS' most notorious members and dozens of foreign fighters were allowed to leave the city before the Syrian army got there. And some of them have spread out across Syria again. Some of them have made it all the way to Turkey. All right, let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Doing okay.
Hey, Mike. I'm 46 years old, and 46 years ago, this nurse smacked me on my butt, and I think it was sexual harassment, so I'm going to come out now and say it.
Oh, no question about it. No question about it. No question about it. Yes.
This is the same, if anybody falls for this, they're morons. It's the same crap that they tried to do with Trump. They rolled out all these people, 30 years later, where were they?
Yeah.
I mean, how old is this woman? She must be 60 years old or something.
Well, I don't know which women you're talking about. I mean, the four women who are making accusations against Judge Roy Moore are claiming they were teenagers when he supposedly propositioned them. And apparently nothing actually happened. They're just saying he propositioned them, which would put them probably, into their 40s and almost 50s now.
Yeah, what a joke. I mean, my God, this is what we become, Mike. Like they have nothing else to offer. No, both parties, they just have nothing to offer, Mike. No tax plan, no nothing. Just war.
It's just
and
about
welfare.
seizing power, plundering the nation, trying to conquer the rest of the world.
Hey, Mike, on Trump's trip, boy, I thought America was going to be loved again.
Well, not really.
I mean,
It's not turning out to be a wonderful trip. I mean, he really didn't get a lot from China. He didn't really get a lot from South Korea. Now he's in there in Manila. You know, this could be strike three and he's out.
why would the Chinese give us anything?
Well,
you know what I mean? Like, they're in the driver's seat economically now.
They are.
What I mean?
They've got the world's strongest currency, and of course, like I said, it was a brain-dead foreign policy to be asking for China to go along with trade deals that would shift the economy back to the U.S., pressure on North Korea. At the same time, you got U.S. warships making stink face at all those Chinese islands in the South China Sea.
Yeah, they're using that Sun Tzu. You know, they're building infrastructure of other countries. They're making friends and deals.
Oh yeah.
Trump just went to look at everywhere he goes. There's been protests, and that's not Trump. It's America.
It's the U.S. government. And see, here's the problem. The U.S. doesn't have anything to offer that anybody else on this planet wants. Our manufactured goods are now seen as overpriced junk. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. And so from the point of view of the war hawks in Washington, D.C., the only possible option is to conquer the rest of the world and force them back to Bretton Woods.
Yeah, I know some people, like a couple of times I call, I know somebody calls and says, well, you know, it's not the American people. Well, it's not the American people, but unfortunately the U.S. government represents us.
Well,
so they give us a bad name.
Given last year's Democratic primaries, I would question that statement. I think the U.S. government represents the military-industrial complex. They represent Wall Street, and they don't really represent the American people because the majority of the American people want peace. They want an end to these wars. They think the Iran deal is just fine. They want this government to stop spending all these trillions and trillions of dollars in all of these overseas misadventures and bring it back home and invest it in our country. So the U.S. government is not, in fact, representing the American people. They may portray themselves as doing that, but it's not true.
It's been like that for a long time, too. They haven't represented this country in a long time. Hey, Mike, on Iran, I know there's some people who, I don't know, they call in, they might not. Iran is not driving over people. They're not Wahhabis. They're not taking machetes out on the streets in the Europe countries. So I don't know why all this hate. Well, we know why the hate is on Iran, but I just want people to keep this in mind. You know, like you said, the Iranians haven't attacked anybody in over 200 and something years. You know, and all the troubles coming out of Saudi Arabia, the United States, Britain, or the U.S. government.
And Israel.
Not everybody in Saudi Arabia is bad, Mike. And Israel. But not everybody in Saudi Arabia and Israel are bad. But unfortunately, we're all governed by bad people.
Yeah, unfortunately, we really are. But again, the situation in Iran is they haven't really done anything. And so the entire case against Iran is all rumor and innuendo that they were somehow involved in this, and they're state sponsors of terror, and we can't tell you how because it reveals methods and so forth. Now they're trying to say that Iran was behind 9/11, based solely on that court.
That's a joke.
It is a joke, and it's based solely on that court decision where some judge said, well, we suspect Iran was behind it, therefore the families of the victims can sue the Iranian government. And there was no proof proffered there, but they're taking that court decision and saying, see, Iran was behind 9/11, we have to go punish them. And the war rhetoric is really getting very reckless. It's not believable. And I'm hoping that the majority of Americans, and for that matter, everybody in the world, is seeing through it and understands that what's really going on is this is American conquest for wealth, because without it, the American economy is headed for an imminent collapse.
I just want to say that with Iran, at least they have elections. Saudi Arabia, which is our best arms buddy, and along with the Britons to the Saudis, they have a purge going on.
Yes.
Yeah. So Game of Thrones. So that tells you who you're allied against tells something of who you are. You know what I mean, Mike? Like if you're allied with these people, that tells you who your government aligns themselves with.
Well,
which is no good.
The U.S. government's best friends are all these dictatorships with fake elections here. Dustin, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. A couple more stories before we go back to the phones here. Tel Aviv is basically signaling that Israel plans to continue striking Syria, and they are refusing to recognize the de-escalation zone agreement that was put together by Russia and the U.S. in the southwest of Syria. And basically, Israel had some input on that. They wanted a buffer zone in southern Syria, basically 50 kilometers long. The agreement that Russia and U.S. came up with fell short of that. So Israel's saying, we didn't get what we want, we're not going to pay attention to it, and we reserve the right to continue attacking Syria to deal with those Iranian-backed forces. Actually, what's going on is that Syria is still illegally occupying the Golan Heights, and they have started selling off the oil and gas underneath it. They don't want Syria to take it back. And you can bet that now that this war with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the U.S. and everything is coming to an end, the next thing on Syria's agenda is going to be taking back that Golan Heights and all of its oil and gas wealth. And Israel doesn't want to give it back. They've already sold it. Deal is a deal. Israel has also deployed the Iron Dome missile defense batteries in central Israel, claiming there is a threat of terror attack from Gaza, which means they're getting ready to have one of their agents in Gaza fire another bottle rocket into the dirt of Israel, at which point they'll start bombing Gaza yet again. They seem to do this every 2 to 3 years, regular as clockwork here. All right, let's take some phone calls. James in Ohio, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. Coincidentally, like the last caller, in 8 hours I'll be the big 5-0, and I suffered the same kind of sexual harassment from a nurse 50 years ago. I have to say this reverse sexual discrimination is a terrible thing. I know when women look at us, they just see beefcake, but I would ask them to keep in mind that there's a...
Actually, in my case, it's beef jerky.
Okay.
Because I'm all dried out. Okay.
But there's a brain in there and emotions, too. Now, a troubling sign on the Iran front. Today, McCain had a open-air press conference, and he was burning old 45s from flock of seagulls. But, Iran...
James,
hello?
You're on the air. I'm trying to figure out what it is you're saying.
Oh, it was a joke.
Okay.
Never mind. But, with Trump, things like the appointment of Nikki Haley, Saudi Arabia arms deal, now he's tough on Iran. Apparently he favors civil asset forfeiture, and the appointment of Samantha Power, Nikki Haley.
Well, the other one is they've just replaced Victoria Nuland, but apparently her replacement is just as pro-war and pro-regime change as Victoria was.
Yeah, I'm beginning to be glad that actually in this election, like all the rest, I abstained because there was no. I mean, I think we really needed a win. We really needed to feel that, but I think it's going to take too long for people to catch up to the fact that, in my opinion, Trump has turned. And
well, he's definitely he's been controlled somehow. The fact that he can go from believing Putin, about no Russian interference, and then just hours later say, "Oh, I believe the intelligence agencies." It's obvious that Trump is not his own man. He's definitely under control from outside forces. Now, my last year's campaign was really more about keeping Hillary out of the White House than putting Donald Trump in, and I'm still glad that we kept Hillary out of the White House, but we definitely did not get the Donald Trump we voted for.
Right. There was one last thing. A movie came out this year. I just happened on it by chance, but it's called Bushwick, and people should watch it because it's where we're headed. There's state secedes, and the federal government isn't going for it, so there are ensuing misadventures. Not so hilarious, but it's worthwhile. It's a relatively low budget movie, but it's well done. So,
all right. Well, we'll keep an eye out for it. Unfortunately, James, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with another phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and let's go back to the telephones here. Peter in Dallas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. A couple of weeks ago, I listened to an excellent discussion between Stephen Molyneux and Dr. Paul Craig Roberts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just like to get your opinion. I think Dr. Paul Craig Roberts basically feels that capitalism will ultimately end up with an unfair, uneven distribution of wealth. And my question is, or the one I've been asking myself, can capitalism with an honest money supply not end up with some of the players having all of it? Are there self-regulating mechanisms, or is Dr. Paul Craig Roberts right, and you simply need a government that really watches over business?
Paul Craig Roberts is absolutely right, and he's not the first person to point out that ultimately, capitalism is going to devolve into fascism. Vladimir Lenin predicted exactly the same thing. That as capitalism began to fail, it would become fascistic to preserve the wealth and power of those at the very top. And in the end, any system that you have, whether it's capitalism or socialism, it's only as good as those who are managing it. And if you have a government that is dedicated to managing the economy for the benefit of the entire nation, either system can be made to work. But when you have a government that allows itself to be bought out by the wealthy and becomes fascistic, which is corporate and government power aligned against the general population, then yes, you're going to see incredible wealth inequality, not just in capitalism, but even in socialism. In the Soviet Union, prior to the collapse, they'd already had the rise of the oligarchs there. Your average Soviet citizen was very, very poor, very, very hard life. And in the middle of that, there were these politicians and these financiers who were incredibly wealthy. So again, any of these systems can be made to work if you're dealing with a population that are basically saints. Unfortunately, human nature being what it is, we know that such systems are going to be perverted to serve personal greed and aggrandizement, and that's why there has to be some kind of a system outside human agency, meaning the laws, to keep it under control. And originally, capitalism was working when they had a recycling mechanism that would take the wealth accumulated at the very top and recycle it back down to the bottom as decent wages and salaries for ordinary working people in order to keep the system going. But fascism removes that.
What was different then? Was it because there was an honest money system? The money supply was they had honest money. Did that make it much more difficult for the banks to move the money to the few?
Well, that was part of it. The idea when you have an honest money system where the government is issuing a value-based currency that basically is equivalent to the gross domestic product, and there's a little bit of banking activity going on, the bulk of the money stays within the hands of the general population. Unfortunately, under private central banking, which by design creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt, over time it is inevitable that all the real wealth of the country gets siphoned out of the people and put into the pockets of the bankers. So the decline of capitalism really began just about 100 years ago with the establishment of the Federal Reserve.
Well, that seems like a little bit like you're contradicting yourself, because that's my question. I'm saying, is the key thing the honest money supply that allows capitalism to work? So you're sort of saying yes, but if we lose that, but then you're kind of saying no too.
No. An honest money system is one where the government coins the money and it spends it into circulation to buy what the government needs. And that money flows through commerce without accruing interest, and then is taxed back in the exact same amount at the end of the cycle to balance the books. And that's the honest money system that this country was founded on. Under private central banking, the private...
But did capitalism work with the honest money system? Or are you saying essentially it's still going to be corrupted?
Well, there are going to be forces trying to corrupt it, but capitalism did work under that honest monetary system. There were abuses, yes, but it wasn't as out of balance as it is under our current system, where the private central bank is allowed to just create money out of thin air. May I finish? Peter, may I finish? Okay, our current system is the private central bankers are allowed to create money literally out of thin air and then loan it into circulation at interest. And that is, of course, a system of enslavement of the people, of the country, eventually of the government itself.
Well, yeah, I get that. I'm all with you on that. My debate with my own head is what happens when we have an honest money supply, and can capitalism work, and will it be self-correcting? And I think you're kind of saying, shorty, yeah.
Well, there still has to be government oversight of the financial sector, because the financial sector is all about greed. And we've got, hundreds and hundreds of years of history showing that is the way the financial system works. These are people who went into finance in order to become very, very rich. And I don't have a problem with people who become rich by working within the system, manufacturing products we want to buy. My problem is with those con artists who game the system so that money flows into their pocket, and they're not returning anything substantive of value to the culture in exchange for it.
Yeah,
and what we need to do is make sure that the people who are monitoring the financial system are not allowed to invest in that financial system. That's really where the problem is. There is a presidential blind trust to prevent the president's personal investments from swaying his decisions. But we ought to have exactly the same thing on all members of Congress and all people who are in charge of these oversight organizations of Wall Street. And that's just going to have to be a deal. If they want that job, we'll give them a good salary, but you're not allowed to, be in charge of your own investments. It has to go into a blind trust. And that has to be enforced. But when you have members of Congress who view each new piece of legislation in terms of their own stock portfolio, inevitably over time the government does get dragged into the service of the money junkies.
Well, before I leave you, let me just ask you one other question related. How about the taxation of unearned income? I think, I forget the guy's name, Michael wrote a pretty good book all about unearned income and how that also allows wealth to be concentrated. It's like in Mexico. When I went to Mexico, there's no tax on property, and I thought, wow, this is great. And then I realized that basically that's how people held money and held power. They just owned all the land, and they never let go of it, so everybody would pay rents to them. And it was so difficult for the peasant to own land that they kept that system. So this idea of unearned income being taxed at a very low rate is another way that the system is rigged to concentrate wealth. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. And interestingly enough, when the income tax was first proposed, it was supposed to be a tax on return from investments, not wages and salaries. And that was definitely designed to put the tax burden on those who could afford to pay the taxes rather than dropping it down on the middle and lower classes where it is today.
Okay, Michael, thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Peter, we're going to let you go. The phone lines are open. Getting on back to the international scene, the Subcommittee on National Security in the U.S. House of Representatives basically held hearings to address the issue of moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And not too surprisingly, not one of the witnesses called was a Palestinian or spoke for Palestinian rights and interests. Now, this hearing seems intended to put pressure on Donald Trump to relocate the embassy. And there is an issue with that. Right now, Tel Aviv is the capital of Israel. They want to move it to Jerusalem. But remember, when the United Nations set up the partition plan, the original partitioning of Palestine, Jerusalem was supposed to be a shared city. And, of course, Israel is defying that UN resolution, and they want to get the U.S. to sort of grant their imprimatur on Israel's capture of Jerusalem by moving the embassy there. And it's another indication that our government is more concerned about what's going on in Israel than it is concerned with what's going on Main Street, USA. The Israeli army is preparing to demolish an entire neighborhood of Palestinian homes in the Jordan Valley in the occupied West Bank. The neighborhood is home to some 300 Palestinians who are going to be expelled from the area. And it's basically several high-rise buildings that are going to be brought down by controlled demolition. So Israel is just, again, they're commandeering land that they don't own. They're kicking out the Palestinians. They're destroying their homes, and they're building homes for Israelis. All of this in violation of international law. But Israel's attitude, supported by the U.S. government, is international law should not apply to them because of the Holocaust, because of all the suffering throughout the ages, blah, 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 blah. Apparently, the Israeli law enforcement investigation into Bibi Netanyahu, now has enough evidence to bring formal charges of bribery against the country's prime minister. This is in reports coming out of Sputnik News. Now, remember, a couple of weeks ago, a member of the Knesset proposed a new bill which would say it is illegal to investigate or charge or try the sitting prime minister of Israel. And apparently that bill did not really get all that far because they're once again talking about indictments. And by the way, we're hearing all this word about indictments here and indictments there, especially sealed indictments. Okay, until somebody's actually charged, it's just more smoke. And I've been getting all these emails about people saying, oh, there's 100 sealed indictments in Virginia and Washington, D.C. And, you know, there's a lot of reasons for indictments to be sealed. It doesn't necessarily mean something is getting ready to happen to the people we would like to see something get ready to happen to. So don't get prematurely excited about this. And maybe I'm being cynical because of my long years as a political observer, but I want to see somebody actually arrested before I get excited about what's going on. Because indictments can sit under seal for years. There are sealed indictments in the court system going all the way back to the Nixon administration, where everybody did their job and the indictment was put on in, but it's under seal, and as long as a judge doesn't unseal it, it doesn't move forward. Now, Syria's ambassador to the United Nations, Bashar al-Jafari, is slamming the United Nations for ignoring the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons. And basically pointing out how the West supplied Israel with nuclear technology and allowed it to ignore non-proliferation international conventions. And it is that 5,000-pound elephant in the living room. Israel is a nuclear-armed nation. They got much of that nuclear material for their earlier weapons from right here in the United States of America, the New Mex scandal. And even Israeli TV has done shows on the fact that there is a bomb factory underneath the reactor at Dimona. But Israel's always ready to go on out and say, oh, Iraq has a bomb factory under their power station at Osirak. So Israel went and bombed the Osirak power station. And following the Iraq war, international observers went on in and looked at the records of the Osirak power station, and all they found was a power station. There was no hidden bomb factory. So now Israel's doing the same thing with Iran. Oh, Iran's doing this and Iran's doing that. Israel's...
Mike, we lost you for about 20 seconds there. You might want to redo the middle of that story.
Okay.
Sorry.
Skype. Gosh darn that Skype here. Well, I'm glad we're back here. Basically, going on back to the situation, Israel's nuclear weapons are the 500-pound gorilla in the room. And everybody knows Israel has them. They built the first generation with weapons-grade uranium they got from right here in the United States of America, the New Mex scandal. And the United States, ever since the Kennedy assassination, the United States has turned a blind eye to Israel's possession of nuclear weapons. Remember when Obama had his first press conference as president? And he was asked point blank, what nations in the Middle East have nuclear weapons today? And he put on his tap shoes and he danced around in a circle, saying we view non-proliferation very, very seriously. And Helen Thomas, the lady who had asked that question, who'd been with the White House press corps for decades, found herself without a job the very next day. Meanwhile, apparently on the outskirts of Blida in southern Lebanon, an Israeli patrol fired smoke grenades toward a Lebanese army intelligence patrol. And it sounds to me like maybe Israel was hoping the Lebanese would actually fire back with live weapons, and then they could say, oh, Lebanon's attacking us, the war is on, the war is on. Apparently, over in western Iraq, U.S. Marines are building a new American base in Anbar, and supposedly to drive the extremists out of their last redoubt in the country. Basically, it looks like the U.S. is going to garrison Iraq from now on, like they're trying to do in Afghanistan. Story over at Al Jazeera asking, will Lebanon become Saudi's next Yemen? And they're basically talking about how this strange situation where Hariri flies to Riyadh, supposedly just for a few days, then all of a sudden makes a public announcement he's stepping down from his position in the government and never came back home. And so all of a sudden, people are saying Riyadh forced him to do the resignation. They want to put somebody else in Lebanon who's more adept at imposing Saudi's regime on Lebanon. But the latest word out of Saudi Arabia is that Hariri is going to return to Lebanon, and he may, in fact, step back into the position of prime minister because his resignation has not been officially accepted. Technically, he's still the prime minister of Lebanon, and he says he may step back into the job as long as there's an agreement on a policy of neutrality involving Hezbollah. So a lot of stuff going on over there. Meanwhile, the blockade in Yemen is continuing, according to the United Nations. Even though Saudi Arabia supposedly opened up the port at Aden, very little is actually getting through, and hardly any of it is getting to the interior of the country. And there's massive famine. There's a massive cholera outbreak, which may even be a biowar attack because it popped up in multiple locations at the same time. And it wouldn't be the first time cholera would be used as a biological weapon. When Japan invaded China in the years leading up to World War II, they were dropping cholera in all the Chinese water wells. Meanwhile, thousands of Yemenis, young and old, took to the streets to protest the Saudi-led blockade that has left people struggling to survive. The siege is oppressive. It is collective punishment. It is a violation of international law. And it just really underscores how crazy that part of the world is becoming right now. And a lot of the craziness seems to be going on over in Saudi Arabia, where there's this purge going on, and they're pushing into Yemen. Now they're talking about Lebanon and Iran. We're looking at a potential regional war here that could very easily turn into a full-on-out global war, which I would not want to see too much of. All right, we're going to take a break for some commercials here, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. We're talking about Saudi Arabia, and there's a lot of turmoil going on over there. And now we're hearing a report where a senior Saudi official has announced that Saudi's King Salman has changed his mind about stepping down from the throne. So that is going to throw a monkey wrench into whatever is working over there in Riyadh, because it looked like this purge was to clear the decks for Crown Prince bin Salman to assume the throne without opposition and move ahead with whatever the plans are for Lebanon and Iran. And now all of a sudden King Salman, who is very old and he's not all there, apparently is throwing a tantrum and saying, no, I don't want to go, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. So we'll see what's going to happen there. Meanwhile, back in Yemen, the Houthi Ansarallah movement, which is the people of Yemen trying to keep from being ruled by a foreign puppet ruler, they're now threatening to hit Saudi warships and oil tankers with missiles. And apparently this was not a hastily taken decision. They had a meeting of Yemeni naval officers. And but again, Saudi Arabia started this going into Yemen on behalf of the United States of America, and Yemen is now warning the battleships and oil tankers of the aggression and their movements will not be safe from the fire of Yemeni naval forces if they are directed by the senior leadership. So this thing is definitely breaking out. Saudi Arabia has now requested an urgent Arab League meeting amid regional tensions. And the word is basically Saudi Arabia is going to try and get the rest of the Arab League to unite in a campaign against Iran. Now, there's a small problem with that we need to keep in mind. Iran is trading partners with Russia. Russia has already said they will come to Iran's assistance if Iran is attacked. Saudi Arabia probably already has assurances from the U.S. government that the U.S. government will come to Saudi Arabia's aid in a war with Iran. So we're looking at a regional Middle Eastern war stretching all the way from Iran over to the Mediterranean. Israel will probably take the opportunity to go into Lebanon and Syria, and it will bring the U.S. and Russia into just a hair's breadth from direct conflict with each other. So this thing is getting about as real can get here. You should be concerned. You should be worried about this. Because if this thing breaks on, I mean, look at how rapidly it's escalating and how chaotic all of this process is. If this gets into nuclear exchanges, who knows where it'll stop. Now, apparently, hundreds of Ethiopian soldiers have been spotted crossing the border town of Dolo into Somalia carrying heavy artillery. So Somalia is heating up again. I noticed they were running Black Hawk Down on the cable channels over the weekend, maybe getting us all ready for that. Oh, the helicopters are cool. Now, we got to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, Trump's 12-day Asian trip, and he's in Manila right now. It's not a stunning success in foreign policy. I mean, they're pointing to a lot of symbolic things like Trump got to have dinner in the Forbidden City, which is like the first time a foreign leader was accorded that honor, as opposed to Barack Obama, who they wouldn't even give him a stare for his airplane here. But behind it all, in terms of the actual agendas being sought, Trump really isn't getting what he wanted to get. The America First rhetoric for the economy from Beijing was met with a very cool response. The same thing with Trump's insistence that China fix the North Korea problem. And Trump is out there saying, well, it's just a matter of Xi Jinping making up his mind to do so. Well, obviously, Xi Jinping is very cautious about getting caught up in putting pressure on a country with provable nuclear weapons. Even though China is a nuclear power, nobody wants to start that. And then, of course, you had Trump's half-hearted pitch on the U.S. trade imbalance with China, which was not entirely connected with reality. And the problem, he said, was not the Chinese, who he complimented on for their cleverness, but on the flaccid policies of prior American administrations. Now, there is some truth to that. But what would Trump do differently? Not really all that much, except, it seems, give a big tax cut with no strings attached to fat corporations that are thrilled to keep moving their operations overseas. And by the way, IBM now has more employees in India than they do here in the United States of America. Now, as you know, the war hawks are out there. Yes, North Korea, let's do North Korea. Let's go on in. Decapitation strike won't work. We don't know where all the nukes and missiles are. We're going to have a ground war. But Lieutenant General Jean-Marc Joas warned in a leaked memo to members of Congress that U.S. troops trying to invade North Korea would lose because they're so vastly outnumbered. North Korea has a huge amount of their population in uniform, under arms right now. And we didn't do all that well in the first Korean War. And there was actually at one point a very serious consideration to reverse that with nuclear weapons. Thankfully, that didn't go ahead. Instead, they declared a ceasefire at the 38th parallel, and they've been making stink face over that fence at each other ever since. Technically, the Korean War never ended. And it was only, 6 years ago that the two Koreas were actually talking about declaring the war over. It's called the Sunshine Policy, getting rid of the DMZ, and reunifying as a single country, the way Germany had done. And look how well that worked out for Germany. And then some outside meddlers got on in and said, oh, no, North Korea thinks they're going to rule the new Korea. No, South Korea thinks they're going to rule the new Korea. And just fanned up that conflict all over again. Now, we have been talking about the real-world condition of America's military. We've been talking about the latest offerings from the defense contractors, very overpriced, poorly performing, fragile weapon systems. F-22 is asphyxiating its pilots. F-35, huge laundry list of problems. Insulation in the fuel tank makes the engines blow up on takeoff. Can't fly in the rain, can't fly in the fog. Still doesn't have the up-to-date combat-worthy software. Won't for a while. Software for the onboard cannon not due till 2019 now. Even Israel is saying the thing is a piece of junk. Then you have the Freedom class littoral combat ship, drivetrain problems. Independence class littoral combat ship, corrosion problems, chronic corrosion. Haven't you never heard of a sacrificial anode? The Zumwalt stealth destroyer, drivetrain problems. The Gerald R. Ford is out there on its sea trials. It has all kinds of problems with their catapults and their radar systems. And then you have the personnel, as demonstrated by these Navy crews on the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain that ignored the maritime rules of right-of-way, and as a result, had these collisions in which people were killed. And now we find out 60, that's 60 admirals of the Pacific 7th Fleet are caught up in this Fat Leonard corruption scandal. So now we're seeing this story. This is where the Army is lowering their standards for recruits. They don't want to go to a draft. They know that the instant they go to a draft, there's going to be a huge uproar with the American people who are already war-weary. And young people are already required to register for the draft. They just aren't doing it yet. What they're doing is still trying to recruit people in. They're going into communities where the economy is really terrible and kids coming out of school don't have any jobs. And they just say, well, here, we got a job for you. It's sort of an economic covert draft. But they're having to lower the standards, always. Last year they lowered the standards regarding overweight recruits. And now they just lowered the standards more, where they will accept recruits with a history of bipolar disorder, depression, drug and alcohol abuse, self-mutilation. This is not how you build an effective fighting force. You're going to have Army units that are just dealing with the meltdown of their own people. All right, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network, and we're going to take some phone calls. Joe in Rhode Island, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. You were talking earlier about the capital of Israel, which is Tel Aviv, being moved to Jerusalem.
Yes.
My question is, Mike, if that happens, would that mean that Israel has full control over the Temple Mount?
Well, Israel has made
undisputed control.
Israel has made no bones about the fact that they want undisputed control over the Temple Mount because they want to build the third temple, which will mean the Messiah will return and the world will fall into Israel's hands. And the real irony there is, despite all the propaganda and the history there, that Temple Mount location is not actually the site of the first temple. The first temple is actually located several hundred yards to the southeast, according to archaeologists, Israeli archaeologists saying, here's where it really was. What they're building on, that whole Temple Mount, is built on the remains of a Roman fort. That's what those walls are. They weren't part of the original temple or even the second temple. They're the remains of a Roman fort. But everybody's just caught up in the Temple Mount this and the Temple Mount that. And, Israel has made no bones about the fact they want to scrape off all the Muslim temples on the top and build their new third temple there. And that, of course, would also inflame the Middle East horribly.
Yeah. How badly would that inflame the Middle East at this time?
I think it would probably be the spark that sets it all on fire. And, I remember Ridley Scott, who's a director I really admired, and I regret that I never got a chance to work with him, did a film called Kingdom of Heaven. And there's that final scene near the end where Balian is having negotiations with Salahuddin. And he's saying, let us leave the city and get back home unmolested. If you try and take the city, we will burn it to the ground. And Salahuddin says, I wonder if it would not be better if you did. And it was one of the best lines in the entire movie because, this pile of stones with the power to drive men mad through the centuries, it really does have an unholy influence over so much of the world's people.
Okay. Michael, one other question if I could. Hello, Mike?
You're on the air.
Yes. The president is over in the Middle East talking to the leaders of probably 5, 6, 7 countries. It seems to me that he's getting everyone on board for an event that's going to take place in the near future.
Well, first of all, he's in Asia, not the Middle East. He's in Asia, not the Middle East. He's in Manila right now, and then he's about to come home.
I meant to say. Yes.
Certainly that was his goal, to try and get all these countries on board with something that may be happening in the Western Pacific, like North Korea. But so far, the read is that he's getting a very cool reception from all of these countries, and I don't expect it's going to be all that warm in the Philippines either.
Let me ask you this, Mike. If God forbid, nuclear war does break out, I know in years past we.
Hello, Joe. Are you there? Okay, I think we lost our connection there. And can we switch over to Fred in Michigan? Aloha, Fred. Are you there? Did we?
Yeah, it's kind of like a. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing fine. You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Well, a lot of people don't realize that there's a thing going on before you get on air. You know, they go, hello, hello, hello.
So, there is a noise that the phone system makes, and when you hear that noise, it means that you are the next guest.
It's like that. Is that a pretty good example of the noise?
I've never heard it. I don't call my show. I wouldn't waste my time.
Oh, well, that is exactly. I'm going to tell you, Mike. Okay, here we go. Okay. This is what you hear before you go on the air. Okay, it's like that's what happens, and people are going, "What the heck's going on?" You know, I don't know what's going on. Am I on the air? You know, so
no, you're right to bring that up here. That is what's supposed to happen when you hear that sound, that white noise. It means that you are now being plugged in to the show feed, and you are the next guest.
So hopefully that all the people are listening to your show when they call in are going to go, hello, can you hear me? You know, maybe that'll take that away. But
that would be nice.
Anyways, love your program, my friend. And what I do, okay, and I'm in total agreement with you as far as all this stuff that's going on. But my biggest problem is that I work during the day. My wife works at afternoons, okay? When I get on your program, I like to do it in the morning, okay? I get the reproduction of your great show, okay? But it hasn't been on lately. And a lot of times when your show is on, it's going, it's like on slow motion.
Is this on, you're saying this is happening on RBN?
No. Yes, I call to listen thing for, and then I put on, number 3 is Mike Rivero, okay? So I put that on, but a lot of times when I hear this going, it's like,
it's running slow.
Like
okay.
Very, very
all right. Apparently, what's happening? This is not happening at RBN. This is happening at the company that provides the phone services for the replays. So we're working on it. That's all we can do. Unfortunately, along with the decline of everything else in our society, our technology is definitely also becoming deteriorated and unreliable. That's the new America. It's all unreliable. Fred, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go here and get on back to the news. And Fred was right on one thing. If you're waiting to go on the air with me and you hear that sound, that means you're up. That's your turn. Now, the Russian envoy, Alexander Grushko, is basically saying that NATO is modeling the command structures of the new NATO. Remember, they were talking about they're revamping their command structure. And Grushko is saying they're basically modeling them on the command structures they had during the Cold War era to basically deal with a potential Russian attack or to deal with an attack into Russia. Now, maybe the concern is that if, in fact, World War III is going to be sparked in Iran, that they want to make sure that Russia doesn't think about going into Europe at the same time, which I don't think they will. But the reality is, according to the Defense Department, these foreign wars are costing America $250 million every single day since 2001. So if you're wondering why your schools are falling apart and there's cracks in the road and the rail system isn't running right and why power is unreliable, why the internet is unreliable, and everything's falling apart, it's because the wealth of this country is being spent on all of these wars. And it's even worse because what they can't spend now, they are borrowing. And according to a report out of antiwar.com, it is now estimated that even if it were to all stop today, the post 9/11 war debt will cost the American taxpayer $8 trillion just in the interest payments alone. Now you know why bankers love wars. Wars are the richest harvest of debt for the bankers. They love wars. Big money maker for them. According to the Prime Minister of Algeria, Ahmed Aiea, apparently the Middle Eastern nations have also ponied up about $130 billion to help destroy Syria, Libya, and Yemen. Now, interesting story in this debate about fake news, real news, and basically the fake news is calling the real news the fake news, while the real news is calling the fake news the fake news. But apparently a former contractor for a British-based public relations firm has gone public saying that the Pentagon paid more than $500 million for the production and dissemination of these fake videos of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Remember the beheading videos and all the rest of that stuff? And we said they're fake. This is all. Yeah, they were fake. $500 million. And obviously, for that kind of money, they were getting real amateurs making those videos here. All right, let's talk about the economic news here a little bit. As you know, China has renamed the Silk Road project the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's developing infrastructure along land and sea trade routes, including the original Silk Route that linked Europe to Asia. And they're building that up, and that's going to be a lot of fun to be traveling on. There's a lot of amazing archaeological remains just all along the side of the road of the way stations that were in business when the Silk Road was first in business. So there's a lot of good things. But apparently they're now talking about a project partnered with Russia called the Arctic Silk Road, saying that modern technology has now created a situation where they're going to be able to open and keep open a cargo ship route up around the northern part of Russia and over to Europe. So they're opening up all these trade routes. China and Russia, they're building infrastructure. They're making deals. The U.S. is building weapons and making war. Now, Bitcoin, a lot of people have been talking about Bitcoin. It's soaring. It's going to go way up high. It's just absolutely amazing. And, you know, I actually managed to acquire one Bitcoin. There it is. But a lot of people are saying it's showing signs of instability. And there have been a couple of major dips in Bitcoin, including one of $35 billion. So it does have the appearance of being a bubble. And I think there's going to be a great disappointment in the future for people who are holding on to those Bitcoins. Now, as you know, many of the pension plans in our country are in serious trouble, both private and public, going all the way back to that 2008 meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud. And because Wall Street's pet rating agencies had rated those mortgage bundles AAA, pension funds invested in them. Then the fraud fell apart. The pensions were defunded. They're all in trouble. And now they're trying to figure out how they're going to fix it. Well, my advice would be go back to the Wall Street firms whose fraud created the problem and have them pick up the costs of the pension funds. But no. Democrats are now talking about a bailout scheme. In other words, they want to bail out the pensions on the backs of the taxpayers. And not only is it simply not fair to once again make the taxpayers pay for the crimes of Wall Street, but it betrays a delusional sense among Democrats that there's still vast amounts of wealth out here in the country that if they just grab it, everything will be okay. And there isn't. Americans are down on the edge right now. So we're going to take another break here for commercials, and we'll be back after these few minutes. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Pat Cadell, in a story that's coming out of Breitbart, is saying the global elites want to manage the country's decline. And basically, he's saying that our nation's elites are already aware the United States is going down. There's an economic crash that's coming. China is on the rise. It's got the strongest currency on earth. And what they want to do is manage the country's decline, which sounds an awful lot to me like vulture capitalism. Just squeezing the last penny out of the society, and then they'll move over to Asia and just restart operations over there. Now, here in Hawaii, we've lost another one of our iconic airlines, Hawaiian Island Air. And this has been the low-cost way of getting between the islands for many, many decades. And they had to shut down and declare bankruptcy. Apparently, the aircraft lessor attempted to repossess the company's remaining 3 Q400 aircraft for non-payment. And so they basically canceled all reservations. They've been in business for 37 years. I remember when Aloha Airlines went out of business. And the problem is, of course, that leaves us with Hawaiian Airlines, which is a good airline, but they are much more expensive. And what this is going to do, there's going to be a ripple effect in that people who fly to Oahu or Maui from the mainland are going to be less inclined to fly to the other islands like Kauai. And that's going to have an even harsher impact on their struggling economies. All right, let's take a phone call. Alex in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I'm sure you probably reported on this, but I haven't been able to listen recently. But anyway, it's kind of, I don't know. Donna Brazile is acting like those weren't the questions that she gave to Hillary Clinton before the debate. She's protecting the Democratic Party. That's it. They want to get rid of Hillary Clinton, but they're still losers. The Democrats are losers. They think that we don't know the truth, and it's just it's pathetic where they're at. I hope everyone knows that. What do you think?
Well, I don't think it's as much about protecting the Democratic Party as protecting certain individuals from indictment, because, again, if Hillary goes down, she's made it clear she's going to take everybody else down with her, and that means ripping open the scandal all the way back to that narcocracy and that CIA gun and drug running out of Arkansas in the 1980s. That was the hidden part of the Iran-Contra scandal. And so that's what's going on. And I don't know what Donna Brazile was thinking when she wrote her book, but it's very obvious that some immense amounts of pressure have been put on her now that the book is out to go on back and just discredit her own work. And whether it involved a threat to her life or some kind of a major financial incentive remains to be seen. But I think the inner circle around Hillary is less concerned with protecting the Democratic Party and more concerned with avoiding any more exposures or any more indictments.
Yeah. She's also saying that the Russians did hack their server or they rigged the election in some way. She's saying that.
Yeah, I know. They got to her. Like I said, a horse's head in her bed or something.
Yeah. Can I say something about Obamacare?
Real quick.
Okay. A lot of people, like a male that's 60 years old and makes $33,000 a year, can get the bronze plan for $0, and the government will subsidize Blue Cross and Blue Shield like $800 a month. And it's just pathetic. It's so sad to see where the only time Blue Cross and Blue Shield would have to pay is if the member paid his deductible first of like $7,000.
Yeah, that's a big deductible.
And until they do that, they're giving Blue Cross $800 a month.
All right. Well, we have to let you go, Alex. We got to let you go. Take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here. Frank in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, I just wanted to chime in on something that you were reporting on a little while ago. you were talking about the author of some article about the controlled decline of America, and I've been talking to this guy for several years, and not the guy, the article, the author of the article, but and he claims that he used to spend quite a lot of time. He worked with these guys that were like really, really smart. That group, they were in that group that you said that used to be in. What was the name of it?
Mensa.
Yeah, and he was not one of them, but they used to let him hang out with them after hours and whatnot. And they would let him in. I don't know how they knew, but they claimed to have an inside track on a lot of what was going to be happening, and had information that no one else had. But they did say one of the constant themes that he always reported on to me was that America's not coming back. It's already been planned that way. It is a controlled decline, a controlled demolition of America. And they said basically the reason for it is the people that are in control, the elites, believe that the standard of living was far too high and exceeded the existing resources. And they were going to bring America down, and America would basically become kind of more of a third or second world place, and that it would never come back. And I really question that with the whole Trump thing. I mean, we've been hearing for years the economy is going to collapse. It's going to be a total collapse. We've heard all these people and Alex Jones, all these different guests over the years. Mm-hmm. They always have these dates, and then the date comes and goes, and nothing happens. But how much control do you think does Trump have over, say, for example, an economic collapse? Because the thing is, I mean, you would think that's one of the things Trump has going for him. Couldn't they knock the economic legs out from underneath Trump anytime they wanted to?
Well,
here's
what's going on. Well, yeah, absolutely. The Democrats would love to see the economy implode under Trump's administration, because then they would tarnish Donald Trump, and certainly the Republican tax plan in its current incarnation. They would be able to point their finger at that and say, see, this is what wrecked it. The United States is in the economic mess that it's in because of 100 years of private central banking coupled with one failed government policy after the other, after the other, after the other. Now, this idea about deliberately lowering America's standard of living down to third world level is actually coming out of the globalists, the New World Order people. Before they can really fully drop all the borders, they have to make the standard of living the same all over the world in order to prevent the kind of refugee migrations that we're seeing right now. So that's where a lot of that is coming from. In terms of the economy, I don't think anybody is really in control of it. And I think the indications are that the economy is in serious trouble, and everything that they're doing is just to kind of try and paint over the problem or kick the can down the road until somebody else is in office. But at some point, it's going to run out. And now the conventional wisdom here is that as long as the Federal Reserve has access to those printing presses, that they can simply create more money to deal with whatever the problems are. But as we saw in Zimbabwe, you're going to wind up in a situation where people are walking around with paper notes in their pockets that say they're worth $100 trillion, and they're going to be worth about 27 cents. I think you can still buy them as curiosities over on eBay. And at that point, the problem is, how do you create a whole bunch of new money to fill in the gaps in our economy without convincing the rest of the world to stop using the U.S. dollar, on which so much of the U.S. economy is now dependent? And that's the corner that they're in right now.
Well, there is the plunge protection team. I believe that exists. I think that's kind of it's kind of official, isn't it?
Well, it's semi-official. Yeah. All the plunge protection team can do is use market rigging to drive up the numbers on the stock market, but it's an illusion because those high prices on the stocks do not actually represent underlying value of the stocks themselves. What the plunge protection team has done in the quest for these sky-high stock market numbers that they can shout at the masses is they've created a massively overvalued stock market. And that means that when a correction finally happens, it's going to have a lot further to go than would have otherwise been the case.
I also wonder, too, if there's some infighting going on that is holding back the downfall, because you got maybe some of the younger globalist elite, maybe the younger family members that think maybe their parents or grandparents are not going to leave them what they're entitled to, so they're trying to rearrange the deck chairs before it all falls down, and they're holding it off so that they can build up their nest, to be in a better place when it goes down.
Well, I can imagine for the wealthier families, there probably is a little of that going on, where the children have sort of been raised with an expectation of an eventual inheritance, and they're starting to see that sort of melt away. And again, if there's a major correction, there's going to be a lot of these people who are going to be stuck with nothing more than an impressive letter from their brokerage firm, with a fancy number on the bottom, and that's all it's going to be. But I'm frankly amazed that the collapse has not yet happened. But again, we're dealing with a government and Wall Street that are just continuously changing the rules, and apparently there's more and more of a pushback to Dodd-Frank to remove some of the regulations that were put on Wall Street following the 2008 meltdown, and that means Wall Street gets to go back to doing what they were doing before with bubble this and bundled that and making huge amounts of money off of the backs of the American people.
I say we pray for an LM, a large meteor to hit, Washington, D.C. for starters, and, at least give us a chance.
Well, I would go for Wall Street because Washington, D.C.'s got a lot of cool museums I'd like to see before it's gone, but that's a personal bias. I mean, let's be honest. We probably, all of us, have a long list of places or individuals we'd like to see a giant meteorite come on down and smack on. But again, it just feels like we're heading for a major collapse of the American economy that might take down the rest of the global banking system with it. And it would not be unlike the fall of the Western Roman Empire, which basically brought on the Dark Ages.
All right, that's Liz.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, speaking of the GOP tax plan, Mitch McConnell is already out there saying that when he promised there would be no tax increase on the middle class, he misspoke. Golly gee shuckies, it was just a slip of the lip here, because the current GOP tax plan does in fact raise taxes on the middle class significantly. The rich are getting a break. The poor don't have anything to tax anyway, so where does the tax burden fall? Always on the middle class. The elites want the middle class to be taxed out of existence because it is from the middle class that opposition to oligarchy has arisen throughout history. And that's why the middle class literally is under economic attack. But Ron Paul is out there with a warning that there is a hidden aspect of the new GOP tax plan that is actually going to raise taxes on pretty much everybody. And the tax hike goes by the name the Chained Consumer Price Index. And the chained CPI raises taxes by understating the effects of inflation on the standard of living. And it does this by using what's called the full substitution effect. Now, with full substitution, the government doesn't consider inflation to have diminished your standard of living if, for example, you can still buy hamburger when inflation has made steak too expensive. So chained CPI pushes everybody into higher tax brackets, not because their income has increased, but because inflation creates the illusion that you are richer even as your actual purchasing power has declined. And Ron Paul is saying that this chain CPI is nothing more than a Federal Reserve imposed backdoor tax increase on all Americans. Now, down in South America, Argentina's president, Mauricio Macri, is calling on the United States to install a full embargo on Venezuelan oil shipments. This is in an interview in the Financial Times. Macri said that the social situation in Venezuela is rapidly deteriorating and more decisive measures are needed to topple the Maduro government. Now, of course, if there's an oil embargo against Venezuela, it's going to help Argentina sell their oil, but it's also going to hurt Gulf Coast refineries in a bad way. But there's been a sudden development, and a lot of people were saying, wow, this can't be true, but the New York Times is now reporting this. Russia is assuming the responsibility of repaying Venezuela's debt, estimated to be anything between $90 and $130 billion. The agreement has already been reached and is expected to be signed on Wednesday. So Russia has just come on in to Venezuela, which is looking at a social collapse and a regime change by the United States, and say, we're going to pay the debt for you. You're out of trouble. And who do you think Venezuela is going to be friends with after this? It certainly will not be the United States of America. So Putin, the chess master, has once again checkmated the United States government. Now, you've probably been hearing about the Paradise Papers. This is a massive data leak on secret economic transactions around the world, most of them involving tax shelters and various other situations. But apparently, one of the things that came on out from this, even as they're talking about blocking Nord Stream 2 and embargo on Russia, it turns out that a U.S. company is selling Russian liquefied natural gas in Europe. 4 cargo carriers owned by Navigator Holdings are loading Russian natural gas at the port of Ust-Luga. Then they head to the Antwerp LNG terminal in Belgium to sell it. So Russia can't sell their natural gas to Europe, but we'll middleman it over there for them. Now, looking at the shale oil bust, according to oilprice.com, peak Permian is only 3 years away. And basically what it is, that for all the environmental destruction that fracking has caused, and we're talking permanent harm to the environment, permanent contamination of aquifers, it never produced the volume of oil and gas that was promised. And they're saying already that their drillers, the fracking drillers, are seeing that they're up against the law of diminishing returns. They're spending more, but they're getting less and less back for it. And the wells are hitting a cost efficiency ceiling. In other words, it's costing more to get the oil and gas up out of these wells than the oil and gas is worth. Now, earlier in the show, I was mentioning that the yuan is the strongest currency in the world. And this is coming out of the German global banking and financial services company Deutsche Bank. According to Deutsche Bank, China has the world's strongest currency. Number 2 in the world is the Israeli shekel. And during the past year, the shekel has appreciated 6.1% against the currencies of Israel's main trading partners, such as the U.S. dollar, the British pound, the euro. Now, not bad for a nation that desperately needs all of your taxpayer money year after year and month after month. They have a stronger currency than the United States does. Why are we giving them all our money? Now, Walmart has started raising the prices of food and household products on its U.S. website. And apparently the reason they're doing that is because more and more people were going to the website to order products to be delivered to their home, and that was resulting in fewer people actually walking in to their brick and mortar stores. And they want people to go into those stores and be subject to impulse buys where they make more money. And so now they're raising the prices of food and household products. So if you're buying through the website, you're paying more for the products than if you go to the local Walmart. Now, as you know, Amazon is doing big business. They're getting into pharmaceuticals. But they've had some issues with the companies they contract with to deliver products. And apparently there's been a bit of a stink. This is coming out of madnesshub.com, where an Amazon customer ordered a very expensive laptop. The delivery man showed up with the box. Neither the delivery van nor the box had the Amazon logo. It just had the Amazon label in it. And when the man opened it up, there was a mop, a little box with a put-together mop for the kitchen instead of his laptop. And he basically complained to Amazon. Amazon take it to the police. Police say, well, you've got to take it back to Amazon, back and forth. Still no word on whether Amazon is going to make good and actually deliver the laptop. But apparently there are some very shady operations setting up to be Amazon delivery companies that are basically going to be plundering and pillaging those Amazon packages. Now, if you're a member of Amazon Prime, one of the reasons people are paying that yearly subscription fee, in addition to access to the TV channel and so forth, is that supposedly it guarantees you free delivery of unlimited purchase throughout the year. So you can imagine how Amazon customers have reacted, finding out that they're now being assessed an additional fee for same-day delivery service. And in Britain, it's £3.99 plus an expected £2 tip for the driver for all orders under £40. And that tells us that Amazon may not be doing quite as well as a lot of people thought it was. But they're certainly doing better than Target. Target has just imploded after that ridiculous bathroom policy, with their transgender bathroom policy. Customers boycotted the company, sales plummeted, stock price dropped. Target hoped to curb some of that frustration by adding a private single-stall bathroom, but it was too little too late. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune reported that Target will be closing at least a dozen underperforming stores nationwide. And yeah, I'm not likely to ever go into a Target ever again. I think we actually have one here on the island of Oahu. Meanwhile, people are tracking shopping because Christmas shopping has actually already started. And they're tracking the amounts of spending. And they're saying it's already dropping at the fastest rate in 4 years. It's going to be an absolute black cloud Christmas. They're already getting ready for Black Friday and all the other sales and the Thanksgiving sales and everything. It's going to be an absolute disaster, and this will probably be the last straw for some of our iconic retailers like Sears. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, a lot of people are looking at these internet shutdowns, which seem to be an ongoing problem. We've had 116 in the last 2 years. And they're accelerating this year. 30 countries have been hit by these shutdowns. And these shutdowns inevitably interfere with banking business for the consumer level. And it's why a cashless society isn't going to work. I told you what Claire and I saw at our local Safeway about 3 weeks ago. Everybody's in line, ready to check on out. The computer system goes down, and only those people who had cash were actually able to leave the store with their groceries. Now, we're having this other article over here. This is from goldcore.com, saying that these same internet shutdowns show why physical gold is the ultimate protection for your wealth. Gold in your possession, under your control, is not subject to an internet cutoff. And we have had a couple of cases of supposed internet problems, shutting people off from their money from the ATM machines. You've got to keep it under your control. Whatever your monetary system is, gold, silver, bottle caps, white seashells, paper, coin, have as much of it under your own control as you possibly can. That way you are immune from the failures in the system that they're trying to make you dependent on. And especially with the possible outbreak of war, we're going to see cyber war all over the planet. And yes, the U.S. will be attacked, and I don't think the NSA can do a thing about it, because they engineered all the back doors that the cyber warriors in other countries are going to be using. Now, over in Great Britain, Panorama, which is a really good show. It's sort of their equivalent of 60 Minutes back when 60 Minutes was doing good journalism. And apparently they uncovered evidence of massive fraud in their student loan system. And one education agent was secretly filmed offering to get bogus students admitted into a government-approved private college for a £200 fee. And that would allow the students to fraudulently claim student loans. Then, for £1,500 a year, the agent offered to fake the attendance records and provide all the coursework. It's a racket. Public Accounts Committee Chair Heg Miller, member of Parliament, said there is criminal fraud going on. From what you've shown me, it needs to be referred to the police. So there's going to be a police investigation. And here in the U.S., we have the diploma mills, where you've got to have an MBA. And if you've got enough money, you'll get an MBA. Doesn't matter what you really know. Higher education has become a racket. Get people trapped in debt on student loans or get them fake degrees to go out and get jobs with. Now, a little bit of depressing news for the people who are favoring Brexit. Story coming out of the BBC, no less, is that... I'll share this until after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, getting on over to Great Britain, bad news for the Brexiteers. BBC is reporting that Parliament will get a binding vote on the final Brexit deal. This was announced by David Davis, and basically said the terms of Britain's exit would have to become law via new legislation, and Parliament will have the opportunity to reject or amend such legislation, saying the agreement will only hold if Parliament approves it. So never mind what the British people wanted, Parliament will get the final say. And I'm sure tremendous amounts of influence are already pouring all over the members of Parliament to do the remain. All right, let's grab a phone call. Tom in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good day to you, Michael. Mike, what is on my mind is I remember around 10, 11 years ago, Mel Gibson had a big problem when he rode with a police officer and he used the word, he's going on a rampage. Now you got this guy, and that was in the news for months and months. I don't know if you remember that. But now yes. Weinstein, it seems like you don't hear nothing more about him anymore. It's all over with him and Weiner and all the Kabbalah that's going on in Hollywood. And when they do the filth that they do, they get away with it after a week. It's like basically out of the news. When Gibson did that, what he did, it was a tyrant against him for months, and they don't want him to be.
Well, there was a difference. There was a difference here. I mean, Mel Gibson was, basically made some bad comments about Jews in Hollywood. He didn't sexually molest anybody. So that's the unforgivable crime here. But the sexual molestation, yeah, it's good for a few headlines, and then it kind of fades away. Although, obviously, with this Judge Roy Moore, that's obvious. They're using these sexual accusations as a hatchet job because the Democrats don't want him to win that open seat in, I think it's Alabama. And now they've had a fifth accuser come forward, saying that he gave this guy or she gave this guy a ride home or something, and he attacked her in the car. And it's just really very obvious that these women are being put up to this. We had that story earlier in the show where apparently a Washington Post reporter was recorded offering a woman $1,000 to come on out and accuse Roy Moore. And so it's definitely a put-up job. Now, Weinstein may not be out of the woods just yet, because apparently this so-called sex addiction clinic in Arizona, the Meadows, is being called a fraud. It's something like $60,000 for a 45-day stay. It's appointed like a 5-star hotel. And you need to understand that sex addiction is not a recognized mental illness in the United States, or for that matter, Great Britain. And basically, it's a public relations front. Oh, this person was doing all these horrible things, but they've been through the Meadows, they've been treated, they're all right, so welcome them back to their job and their community, and they're reformed, and they'll never sin ever again. So that's now coming on out saying, yeah. And let's be honest, to some extent or another, we're all sex addicts, right?
Yeah, Michael, absolutely. Well, whatever. But Weiner, that's another case. This Anthony Weiner, he went to a sex ranch in Tennessee. They had him on horses, and they said the horses were going to make him somehow get rid of his sexual addiction. I don't know. Was that all about? I read that in an article in the Herald. That Weiner was in a sex ranch in Tennessee, and he's riding around on horses, I guess bareback, naked, whatever. And it was going to help him with his sexual addiction problem. In the meantime, Uma Abedin divorces the guy. We don't know really what the reason is. Was she with Hillary, or we don't know what the deal was with that. Maybe Uma was with Hillary or whatever. And I don't think Bill's been with Hillary for 30 years, to tell you the truth. But Weiner, that's another guy that got off scot-free, basically, it seems like. Well,
no, he had to go to jail. Remember?
Yeah, for 21 months. Most people would get 24 years, maybe.
Well, he also lost his career. He also lost his career. It's not like he got off scot-free. He did suffer some consequences, and given the fact that all he was doing was sending pictures of his parts, in a text message, it wasn't that great a crime. So it's not like he got off scot-free. Anyway, listen, Tom, we're going to let you go.
Michael, one more thing. Can I say? I want to say one more thing.
Just
Michael,
one more thing, okay?
John McCain, he's a great. Okay, John McCain is supposedly a great war hero. What did he do, Michael? My father went to war. My grandfather was World War I. My great-great-grandfather was in the Civil War. They were heroes in my book. But this guy, McCain, he was the greatest hero. He got caught. He was in a hot box. I understand all that. But the guy's a super war hero? Like this guy something out of John Wayne movie? Give me a break.
It's all manufactured. It's all manufactured. He's the darling of, he and his father were both of service to Israel. Israel has a lot of influence over the media, so they make him look like a hero. But, the people who are on the forestall think McCain was the one who set off that horrible fire. The people who were POWs with McCain said that yes, he did cooperate with the enemy, which is treason. And as a matter of fact, some of these Tokyo Rose broadcasts that he made for the North Vietnamese have now surfaced, and they're on the internet. And the only reason he wasn't charged with treason when he was finally returned home was Richard Nixon just issued a blanket pardon for all the POWs. And at that point they started saying, well, he survived the Hanoi Hilton and that makes him a hero. And a lot of people
would... He's a hero.
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. He's a classic con artist and a politician, and that's all he is. And he's out there thinking, war is great.
His wife won all the money.
Sorry?
Right. No, I said his wife owned the Budweiser distribution. That's how he got all his money, I guess. The wife, he had a Budweiser distribution thing, and that's how he inherited a lot of money, I guess. He married into money, I guess.
So did John Kerry. He married into the Heinz Foods fortune. Anyway, listen, Tom, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates rejoining our network. And we're going to take a phone call from Errol in the Netherlands. Errol, aloha. Welcome back to the show. We haven't heard from you in a while. What's going on over there?
Here in the Netherlands and here in Germany, in the Netherlands, it's all BS, and in Germany it's BS. I know German politics and everything, but it's okay. I just want to touch on a movie. And the movies, two movies. We got one movie. It's the movie that's called The Usual Suspect.
Oh yes.
I don't know if you know that movie. Yeah.
Yes.
And we got the Fugitive.
Yes.
Do you know The Fugitive with Harrison Ford?
Yes.
Okay. So I watched them both. So it's ironic, and when we see what's now happening in the West, and in the West particularly, we can analyze that what the politics are now, how do you call it, experiencing. So not left, not right. We don't talk about left and right. We talk about ironic moments.
Yes.
When we see the movement, how this goes, those moments in time where we are now in, this is perfect, because when people say, okay, you did it, or I did it, or whoever did it, yes, you were the problem, no, I were the problem. No, we all were the problem. We did not comply. And when you do not comply, you did not study how it worked at the first time. So this is the most important part. I hope people will understand what I'm saying, because this is a very, how do you call it?
Yeah, I'm having a
time in our life. Yeah. Okay, say it.
I was saying I'm having a hard time trying to figure out what it is you are trying to say. I mean, you started with the movies, and you're talking about irony, and it almost seems like you're saying that we should be paying more attention to what our politicians are doing, which I definitely would agree with. But
exactly.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. And also, not only our politicians, also the people that say that they are going to keep us secure. Because when the people saying that they are keep us secure and they don't, then we can give then we can get it all back into security, yeah. And what do we pay every year? Every year in security, also in the Netherlands. I must say, in the Netherlands.
I think we're all I think we're in agreement that for all the money governments take from the people aren't really getting fair value for that. And we've been saying that for a long time. Anyway, Errol, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here because I've got a lot of news to cover before the end of the show. So thank you very much, and we're going to let you go there. Now, getting on back to Europe, Germany is out there having military exercises, but it's not to deal with Russian aggression. Apparently, the German army is wargaming a breakup of the European Union in its recent drills, probably mostly going on down to securing Germany's borders against the chaos. But Germany seems to feel that the European Union is going to break up, and they want to be ready for when it happens. Now, apparently, a conservative member of parliament is now joining the ranks calling for Britain to just leave the EU without a deal. Forget the deal, forget Parliament having a final say, just cut the lines and go. And there's no reason why Britain can't do that, because the longer they wait, the more the European Union is going to be finding some way to keep Britain enslaved to that European Central Bank and to Brussels. And right now, Brussels is in a panic because more and more of the EU want out. Apparently, 750,000 people basically clogged the streets in downtown Barcelona over the weekend, demanding the release of jailed separatist leaders. And that 750,000 number is from the Barcelona police themselves. So that is not going away anytime soon. Now, Italy is demanding exit from the EU mafia, saying we will never be your slaves. So this is spreading all over the EU. And apparently on Sicily, they had a recent election, and the Democratic Party, led by former Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, has suffered a severe defeat in Sicily. The Eurosceptic parties won the election by a landslide, 81%, sending yet another warning sign to Brussels that the EU doesn't like being part of the EU anymore, and they want to go. Meanwhile, over in Great Britain, the Guardian had this article on the rising danger of white nationalism, and they go back to the fact that November 11th is Armistice Day, and basically the end of the First World War, and how it basically established that sovereign independent nations would be free from these globe-straddling imperial empires. And that was celebrated as a good thing. But now, of course, they're trying to go the other direction, that every small independent nation, every sovereign nation ought to want to be part of a globe-straddling empire, the New World Order. And by the way, according to the FBI, anti-white hate crimes are now the fastest growing racial hate crime in America. So it didn't just stop with the rhetoric about, whites are bad and whites should go away. There are now physical attacks on white people. It's the fastest growing segment of racial crimes. You're not going to hear that in the corporate media. The corporate media, they'll go ballistic on a white person committing a crime against a black person. They don't report black on black crime, and they don't report black on white crime. But according to the FBI, it's becoming a major, major problem. Now, getting on back to the Washington Post, they're out there promoting these accusations that Hungary is hate-mongering against George Soros. And basically, they're quoting accusations coming from a group Soros is funding. So here you have George Soros, and the government of Hungary is saying it's time for an investigation, and one of Soros's groups saying, oh, Hungary is just hate-mongering against Soros. You're being an anti-Soros. That's going to be the new term here. And the Washington Post just goes along with that. Because the Washington Post loves George Soros and the New World Order and the globalists. Now, I wasn't going to get too much into this sex scandal witch hunt because that's what it's turned into. But I had to respond to this one. As you know, George Takei, who played Lieutenant Sulu on the Star Trek original TV series and then later on in the first part of the movie franchise, is gay. He came out after the Star Trek TV series was over. And he's been accused by Scott Brunton of groping him in his Los Angeles condo, and George Takei is denying it. And it's a little bit of an embarrassment because only a couple of months ago, or a month ago, George Takei was on the Howard Stern show, and they asked him point blank if if George Takei had ever groped a man's crotch without permission, and there was a long pause, and Howard Stern and the ladies with him on the microphone said, there we are. So now there's this allegation. But George, you should have basically just let it sit right there, because now George Takei came on out and tweeted that the only reason the story is spreading all over the place is not his name value as one of the original Star Trek people. It's Russian bots. Russian bots are being used to spread the sexual assault accusation. Come on, George. I mean, talk about to boldly go where no man has gone before. That's a little out there. That is a little out there, George, Russian bots. And, of course, I did get to work with him on the first Star Trek feature film, and I got to spend time with him again later on at one of the Rose Parades where the Star Trek stars were on one of the floats, and I was a volunteer pedal pusher. Because, it's all floral material on those floats. They are literally put together the night before that parade. So we're all out there, and it's December 31st, and we're gluing the flowers and everything. And you get a little medal to say you were part of the float team for that. And it's a lot of fun. It's a local thing. And so George Takei was there, and he spotted my Star Trek production belt buckle, and came over and he talked and everything. And he seems like a very nice guy. But, again, it may have just been a case of a seduction gone wrong. And certainly in this hypercharged climate of everybody accusing everybody of some kind of a sexual assault, it's very easy for something that's sort of merely a hint to see where somebody's head might be gets turned around and blown out of proportion. But Russian bots, really, George, that was the shark right there. I love this one over in Detroit. Oh, my goodness. Officers from the 12th Precinct pretended to be drug dealers, and they were out there selling drugs, and two undercover officers from the 11th Precinct showed up pretending to be customers. And the deal went bad, and apparently these police officers from these two precincts literally got into a fight, and one of them wound up in the hospital. Gee, guys, can't you find any real criminals out there? Little more of a down story here. Apparently, authorities in California have demanded that the United Methodist Church in Malibu, California, stop its program feeding the homeless. And it isn't a big program. They've been giving away 100 meals a week on Wednesdays. But apparently, Malibu is saying they want the homeless to go away, stop feeding them. It is shocking how caring for the homeless and providing food for them is being criminalized it's not like these people can just disappear or vanish. If you're not feeding them, they might start eating the tourists. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And boy, have you noticed lately we're getting a lot of major earthquakes. Of course, we had that 7.3 that hit on the Iran-Iraq border region. So far, at least 400 people killed in that one. They felt that one all the way out to Israel. That was a big, big quake. And then we had that 6.5 down in Costa Rica. And just going on down the chart here, 6.3 Ascension Island region, 6.5 Papua New Guinea. And, boy, the planet is just rocking and rolling here. So, now, unfortunately, for those of us living here in Hawaii, there has been a new study out from the University of Hawaii at Manoa saying that Hawaii has been hit with up to 200 times more Fukushima fallout than expected. And they're saying over 1 trillion becquerels of nuclear waste fell on Hawaii. And scientists are saying the plume may have taken an alternative path and is greater than anticipated. Now, the predictions were because of the North Pacific gyre that the plume, the water plume, was going to miss Hawaii, then eventually rebound off the west coast of North America. Now they're saying that it appears that some of the plume did directly hit here. Now, remember, a becquerel is a very, very tiny measurement, and they're talking about the entire state. We've been running our own radiation meters here. So it's an area of concern, especially with the idea of contamination. And Claire and I stopped eating locally sourced seafood pretty much the day that happened. But again, it tells us that Fukushima meltdown was a lot more serious than the corporate media was trying to let on at the time. Now, there's been apparently some other kind of an incident because a radioactive cloud has been detected over Europe. Again, very low levels. And they're indicating that there's been some kind of an accident in a nuclear facility in Russia or Kazakhstan in the last week of September. Now, they're saying they don't think it was an accident at a nuclear reactor. They're saying it more than likely was a nuclear fuel treatment site or a center for radioactive medicine just dropped something. But the levels are really low. But again, you got to be careful. I remember many years ago there was a horrible disaster down in Brazil where somebody, some doctor's office had disposed of a cesium-based radiotherapy cancer machine without going through the proper disposal decontamination procedures. They simply threw it out in a junkyard. And people salvaging in the junkyard found it. They broke it open. They thought this blue glowing stuff was really cool. And, they painted it on themselves. Oh, look, it's funny. And they shared it with their friends. And it was a horrible contamination disaster here. Now, we've been talking about the problems with computers and computer security and the somewhat lackadaisical attitude that the U.S. government seems to have to cybercrime, certainly among the consumer level. And so it's with interest we read this article out of Sputnik News that says that many top cybersecurity posts remain empty in the U.S. government 10 months into the Trump administration. The key positions remaining empty are a federal chief information officer, a federal chief information security officer, a chief for the Homeland Security Department's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection Division, and numerous agency CIOs and CISOs. So, yeah, it's obviously not a priority, which is why you've got to really take care of your own computers and your own computer security. And by the way, I'm just getting flooded with all kinds of malware-laced emails these days. It's almost like the malware is outnumbering the legitimate email. Article out of ZDNet. As you know, people who have kept databases for very long periods of time, over time those databases start to accumulate huge amounts of bad data. And they've come up with a term for it describing data hygiene. How clean is your data? And the reality is that in a lot of cases it isn't. And hiring the interns to go on in and check it all by eye and try and fix it is prohibitively expensive. So now they're trying to develop a new system of machine learning that will go in and learn what your data is supposed to be and then fix it and patch it up. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Samsung is, believe it or not, going to put Linux on the Galaxy. And supposedly, developers could use the Linux environment to run desktop apps rather than Android apps when a phone is docked. And this could open the door to desktop versions of Chrome, Firefox, LibreOffice, GIMP, or other popular GNU Linux applications. And Samsung hasn't shown any of those programs working yet, but at least for those who want to tinker with the metal, it's a way to go. And I remember when I was younger, talking to the bare metal was a lot of fun. Of course, the machines were a lot simpler back then, and Linux is a lot of fun. I've got a nice little Linux box here that is running on a Raspberry Pi 2. And it does remind me of how fun computers were back when they were simple and easy to use. And you weren't spending all your time on patches and updates to fix the problems that the original suppliers had just allowed out into the market. Okay, let's see. Now, you know, the iPhone 10, I got to tell you right now, I think Apple has really missed the boat with this one. As you know, that facial reading system failed during the product launch, and there is no fingerprint button. And it's got other problems. It's glass on both sides to allow for the cordless charging, but it's very fragile. If you drop it from just 3 feet, you're going to break it if you don't have a soft case for it. Apparently, if you're using it in a warm environment and you take it outdoors into the cold environment, like winter, it'll stop working completely. Now there's another issue called the green line of death. And as a final coup d'etat, if you were, hackers have been able to fool the iPhone 10 Face ID with a simple mask that cost just about $150 to make. And all they did was, and again, it shows this may not be as secure. It's a lot of trouble. Basically, they took a 3D scan of the person's face that was registered to be in the phone, and they 3D printed a white mask onto which they pasted cutouts from a photo to get the eyes and the mouth. And it worked. It actually worked. Now, obviously, your average iPhone user isn't going to sit still while their face is being 3D scanned, that they know of, but it does indicate that Apple went to market with this technology before it was really robust. And given the high cost of the phone, I don't think it's going to work. I mean, they're already rushing it out there. I got the notice from my cell carrier, we've got the iPhone 10. Good, you can keep it. I'm happy with my iPhone 7. Now, as you know, censorship on the Internet is a very, very thorny issue. And the government is putting a lot of pressure on social media like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and the rest of them to try and impose censorship, to get rid of fake news, meaning anything that questions the official narrative on any subject whatsoever. And the social media companies are very resistant to doing that because they realize what they've done already is already costing them users. People are canceling their accounts and saying, I'm going to go with one of these new up-and-coming startups that respect the First Amendment. Well, now censorship is going to be taken away from the social media. It's now being privatized as a business. Stephen Brill is raising $6 million to launch a company called NewsGuard. And this new service will rate news sites on their trustworthiness from green to red, based on accountable human beings of 40 to 60 journalists, meaning people who are paid by the corporate media. And he thinks he's going to make money on this. Now, as you know, there's been a big push toward electric cars, and I think they're very cool. I wouldn't mind having an electric vehicle for my next vehicle. But it turns out they're not as green and clean as they seem. And a lot of it comes down to the lithium batteries. Now, the lithium batteries are ideal for the electric cars because they hold a lot of electricity and they're very lightweight. The efficiency of the electric car is it's a very lightweight vehicle. And the lithium batteries go along with that. Unfortunately, the process of mining and processing the lithium into the batteries uses huge amounts of energy, most of it provided by fossil fuels. And in most states, the electricity that the cars are being charged with is being produced by fossil fuels. They're still just as polluting. The pollution is just someplace else at the other end of that wire. Now, hopefully, this new generation of lithium batteries that was just introduced at the last Consumer Electronics Show may ease that. It depends on what it takes to manufacture them. But the promise there is they have a greater energy density than current lithium batteries, and they can charge extremely fast. And that was, I think, the last major roadblock to widespread acceptance of the electric car. Now let's go on over to Madagascar, because there is a concern that this Black Death that has hit Madagascar, it's killed 140 people. They're concerned that it is a somewhat different strain than what they had in those BSL-4 laboratories, and it might be untreatable with the current state of the art. And there's a concern that it might actually reach Britain, Europe, or the U.S., similar to the Ebola outbreak back in 2014. But it was only a few isolated cases. It wasn't a widespread outbreak. But still, there's an area of concern. Now, interestingly enough, apparently, Red Cross staff, meaning subcontractors, may have stolen $6 million donated to fight that 2014 Ebola crisis. And that basically is 1/5 the total amount they had earmarked for fighting the outbreak. In other words, the Red Cross sent over $30 million, $6 million of it vanished. They're trying to pursue legal options against the parties involved. But one of the fraudulent incidents took place in Liberia. There, the Red Cross said it lost $2.7 million through inflated payments that were made for payroll and volunteer stipends as well as relief items. In Guinea, a clearance service provider is accused of furnishing them with overestimated or fake bills, leading to the loss of $1.17 million in that country. Now, folks, I got to tell you, and we've seen it here. We saw it with Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma. It seems like there's something about a major disaster or an epidemic that seems to encourage scammers to come on out and say, yes, I'll dive in there and I'll make everything okay. And because there's the press of an emergency, they seem to get away with it a lot more. Now, as you know, everyone's talking about the opioid crisis in our country. And we're not talking about the street heroin. We're talking about the overprescription of these highly addictive medicines by doctors, sold by the pharmacies. And there have already been allegations and even a few arrests of pharmaceutical corporations financially incentivizing doctors to get their patients hooked on these medications. Well, where is all this opium coming from? Well, as it turns out, Afghanistan, under U.S. control, now supplies 85% of the world's heroin. Now, under the Taliban, opium production in Afghanistan had stopped. And when the U.S. went in, the poppies were blooming, the bumper crops were out there, and critics of all this were saying, why are you allowing the opium trade to come on back? And the U.S. excuse was, if we don't let these farmers grow opium poppies, they'll have nothing on which to live. They will not be able to live. Really? What were they growing when they lived under the Taliban? They obviously made it through that. Maybe they were growing vegetables, or maybe they were growing hemp, or who knows? But that opium is now flowing into the United States, both legal and illegal, and it is a major, major crisis. Now, apparently there has been a problem with Monsanto spraying an experimental weed killer that was not yet approved, and it damaged 42,000 acres of crops in Missouri, one of the hardest hit areas, as well as swaths of crops in 9 other states. And this weed killer is called dicamba. It's supposed to be a follow-on to glyphosate. And apparently Monsanto decided on this test spraying on the sure and certain belief that the FDA was going to approve it, but the approval never came through. And there was an advisory from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency saying the damage this year from this experiment, 3.6 million acres of food crops in 25 states. Does this sound like good government or good management? Does it sound like Monsanto is exercising some sense of environmental responsibility? I would say probably not, because there's another story where GM food crops are being illegally grown in India. Now, the GM Containment Register database is run by GeneWatch and Greenpeace and contains cases of genetically modified contamination dating back to 1997. The authors of a 2014 paper published in the International Journal of Food Contamination analyzed 400 or so cases in the database by crop and country. GM rice accounted for about a third of the contamination cases, despite the fact there is officially no GM rice grown anywhere in the world. It's not approved. They also focused on cases of contamination arising from unauthorized GM crops, those without any authorization for commercial growing anywhere in the world. Now, I think what Monsanto's grand design is to basically get the entire world contaminated with their GMO crops, get rid of the heritage species, get rid of the honeybees, so nobody can pollinize their plants naturally, and then the whole world becomes dependent on the GM companies for all food production. Every spring you have to go back to the company and buy their seeds. You can't save seeds from last fall, which is the traditional way of farming. When I was a kid growing up on a farm, that's what we did. When we did the harvest in the fall, we made sure that we'd save plenty of seeds for next spring's planting. You're not going to be able to do that anymore. Now, here's a story that came out of Natural News. You've probably seen the commercials all over TV for this product called Ensure. It's supposed to be a nutrition shake. And as is the case with so many of these laboratory-produced food substitutes, it's coming up short. And apparently hospitals like to feed this Ensure to their patients, not realizing that it's actually harmful for them and may actually delay a patient's chances of a recovery. Remember that story we did last week where it turned out natural mother's milk has a compound in it that kills cancer cells. And that's obviously not something that's going to be included in the factory manufactured baby formula. They don't really know. Now, the winter is off to a cold start. The Arctic blast has come on in. They had temperatures below 0 Fahrenheit in North Dakota, single digits in Minnesota. Definitely hit the Pacific Northwest. It's snowing in Maine right now. And so Al Gore is out there saying, it's not snow, it's white lumpy rain, believe in global warming. Over at the United Nations, they finally come up with a number of what it's going to cost to slow global warming by 2/10 of a degree Celsius by 2100. And it's going to come to trillions of dollars. At least $5.3 trillion to shave 2/10 of a degree Celsius off a projected 3.2 degrees Celsius of warming by 2100. Now, the reality is that these are people who can't predict accurately for 48 hours ahead whether we're going to have rain, storm, or sun. But we're expected to believe that they know what the climate is going to be doing in the year 2100, when we don't even reliably know what the sun, which dominates climate on Earth, is going to be doing in 2100. It's a scam. It's all about money and power. And amazingly enough, story that came on out of this YouTube video, in the Swedish press, they're out there saying the world needs a climate dictator. We need a climate dictator who will tell us how to live. Now, Prince William is starting to make a lot of noise in the media, and a lot of people are saying this may have to do with the secession, because as you know, the Queen of England is starting to pull back, and Prince Charles is taking over some of the royal duties, and he's first in line for the throne. But polls in Great Britain are saying that the British really don't like Prince Charles, and they would actually favor Prince William, who's third in line for the throne, to become the next king of England. Well, they may change their mind after hearing some of the things he's saying, because Prince William is out there urging for depopulation efforts in Africa. All those icky-poo human beings, they're getting in the way of the environment and the wildlife and, of course, all those mineral riches that corporations want to get after. So we have to depopulate Africa. And what's really kind of scary is between the Black Death in Madagascar and an outbreak of Marburg on the Kenya-Uganda border, it looks like Prince William may be getting his wish. Remember that National Security Study Memorandum 200, authored by Hillary Clinton during the Nixon years? It actually set as U.S. policy covert population reduction in other parts of the world. There really are world leaders who think that way. They would love the earth much better if it wasn't for all those icky-poo human beings. And so to nobody's surprise, Natural News is running a story where apparently once again the World Health Organization has been caught adding covert sterilization chemicals to vaccines deployed in Africa. And this article came on out. HCG found in World Health Organization tetanus vaccines in Kenya raises concern in the developing world. And the paper documents the covert deployment of an infertility chemical in vaccines that are administered to young black women in Kenya. Remember that epicite gene? Was a strain of corn, GMO corn, funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Anybody eating that corn becomes sterile, because the epicite gene tricks your body into reacting to sperm as if it's an infection. And it sends antibodies to kill off those little wrigglers before they can fertilize an egg. And what happens if that gene breaks into the wild? And if you look at the population decline that we're seeing here in America, not counting the refugees, not counting the illegal immigrants, the population drop is mostly focused on the Hispanics, the highest per capita users of corn. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program, and we're going to take our last phone call now. Jimmy in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I just wanted to talk to you regarding the Prince William and the depopulation in Africa. I think that he's actually speaking from a fairly sane point of view. So they project, this is from UNICEF, they project that Africa's population will double in the next 35 years. By 2050, they'll be up to 2.4 billion as opposed to the 1.2 billion that they are now. And then 50 years after that, they will double again. So by the time the 2100 comes around, 50% of the babies that are born on the face of the earth will be Africans. Is that sustainable?
Well, you know, we have the population control advocates are saying population needs to be checked virtually everywhere on the planet at the same time. I think Prince William's focus on Africa has more to do with freeing up those natural resources than it does with any humanitarian concern. That was certainly the thrust of Henry Kissinger's National Security Memorandum 200, which basically said the reason we want to depopulate these third world countries is they have a bad habit of using up these raw materials that our corporations need. And so it was driven by economics and a desire for access to the resources, not necessarily the humanity. Now, the reality is that as the population grows, if they're running out of food and water and space, the population growth will go into a decline. It's very easy to throw around these expanding numbers and saying by this year it'll be so many millions and billions and zillions, but the reality is that as Africa reaches the point where it can't sustain the human population anymore, the human population will go into decline, sometimes violently with wars. It's not like it's all that long since one set of Africans were eating another set of Africans as well. But under nature, these things do have a tendency to correct themselves. Now, I'll be the first one to grant you that there is a human population problem on this planet, and that's because sex is a lot more fun than dying. The problem I have is with people like Prince William who say, well, we should eradicate that particular group of people, or these people over here should be sterilized so they don't have children, or these other people over here, they're Untermenschen, and therefore we should basically starve them to death like they're doing in Yemen. And anytime somebody comes up to me and starts saying that there's too many people in the world, I'll say, well, do something about it. There's a tall building. Feel free to leap right off and hit a banker on the way to the ground. The problem I have is that everybody's saying that the world has to have a lower population. They don't want to be the ones that have to go without kids or have to have a shortened lifespan. And so there's a little bit of an arrogance in that whole situation. Again, as with the human-caused global warming, the long-term dire prognostications of the population control people have a bad habit of never coming to pass. For example, again, as I said earlier in the show, the birth rate and population in the U.S. is actually in decline right now. And whether that's because of the economics or the epicite gene, we don't really know. And there is that other aspect in that as population density reaches a certain point, you start seeing an increase in the per capita occurrence of homosexuality, which makes it sound like it's a natural population control function built into the human genome. Okay, there's the music. Jimmy, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to get out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard show here. Please stay tuned for the John Stedmiller program. He's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you have learned here, share it everywhere that you know. Please keep pushing Uranium Gate, Dossier Gate, and Primary Gate in all your email lists and all of your social media. We have to keep pushing that forward. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.